Kia ora. Welcome to Conversations with Wāhine, brought to you by the Wellington branch of the National Council of Women, New Zealand.
Today you've got me, Harita, and I'm joined with Aimee. How are you going, Aimee?
Good, I am very well, thank you.
Today we've got a National Party candidate. Her name is Emma Chatterton, and she is a former teacher, a mum of four, a highly educated, determined and accomplished person. She currently works as the strategic project lead for ImpactLab, which is a Wellington company founded by Sir Bill English, which helps organisations measure and understand their social impact so that investment works for communities and people can live the lives that they choose to. After completing her schooling in Dunedin, Emma gained a Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts in Music from the University of Cambridge in the UK. She also holds a postgraduate qualification in secondary education from the University of Buckingham and an honours degree in English literature from Victoria University of Wellington. Before starting at ImpactLab, Emma was a music teacher at various schools in Lower Hutt, Auckland, and across the UK. She currently serves as the trustee of Whirinaki Whare Taonga in Upper Hutt and on the advisory board of the Women of Worth Charitable Trust. She lives in Avalon in the Remutaka electorate with her husband Tom and their 4 children under 8. Welcome, Emma. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for your lovely introduction.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to be chatting to you today. So first things first, what sparked your interest in politics and what drew you to the National Party in particular?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. You know, I am not someone that really went through my life thinking I wanted to be a politician. And it's not actually something I even really considered until relatively recently. My career has always really been focused on doing things that have tangible impact on the lives of others. And I guess I saw that from my own parents. My mum was an early childhood music teacher. My dad was a police officer. Their roles were all about serving others in the community. And I actually always told my mum that I was never going to be a music teacher, no matter what. So there's some irony in the fact that I decided to go and have a career in education and specifically in music. But teaching was a really good way to serve and see impact. And the move to social investment was really exploring having impact at scale on more people and more organizations and learning what change making looked like. But the opportunity really to work in social impact just showed me lots of places where there are disjuncts in how we make decisions. So on the one hand, you have funders and decision makers over here with a certain type of language and processes and priorities. And then on the other side over here, you have change makers and community groups and frontline teams that often have, you know, different languages and systems and priorities. And I'm really interested in how we draw those things much closer together so that we're using a shared language and priorities to drive real, tangible, meaningful change. And working in this space, I guess, is what really inspired me to go into politics, because it's often governance and decision making that is deciding how we steward, say, taxpayer investment to communities. And I became really interested in that. And to the second part of your question, why the National Party? I think the values that the National Party have really speak to my heart and speak to the passion that I have for social investment. So things like equal opportunity. You know, the National Party believes in equal opportunity for everyone. And what does that really look like? It's quite a challenging concept, really. What does it look like to create equal opportunity for our 5-year-olds so that they can all go to school ready to learn? What does it look like to create equal opportunity into employment pathways so that everyone has the identification, the transport, the access, the driver licensing, whatever it is that they need to be able to access employment. So that equal opportunity really speaks to me, but so do the many other of the National Party values, like taking personal responsibility, reward for effort and achievement. My family raised me to be really aspirational and, to work hard and set goals. And those things have really got me where I am. So that's why National for me. I think National is the party that's going to be able to deliver this meaningful change for communities and just a real shared appreciation for the values that the party has. That was kind of like a speech. I said I wasn't going to be speechy, but sorry.
It's okay. I mean, yeah, you've achieved a lot in your bio. Listening to it, I was like, oh wow, yeah, that wasn't. It doesn't seem to be the typical background that you expect from a politician. So so it's cool to hear your backstory, and I imagine it's also, it's a couple of weeks before the election. It must be hard to, you've got things to say.
So much energy right now for the campaign. No, I love being out there talking to people, and I think one of the things that created such an enormous opportunity for me as a young person was winning the Girdlers Scholarship. So that's what enabled me to go overseas and study at Cambridge. And that opportunity to live abroad for 8 years, but leaving New Zealand when I was only 18, gave me so many diverse experiences. And studying at Cambridge was also an opportunity in itself to be extended in so many ways. It's both the breadth and depth of the education there. I spent a couple of months volunteering in the Middle East, teaching English. We had touring choirs. I debated for the university. I feel like it kind of propelled me forward, that opportunity. And then when I came back to New Zealand in 2015, we'd had our first baby, just wanted to be closer to home and grow up with that Kiwi lifestyle that, I had cherished as a young person. Coming back here, we felt really ready to settle down, and we've had a family young, and we have 4 kids. So it's fun and vibrant, but also really it's actually total chaos. That's why I have this blurry background, because there's like washing and signs and unmade beds and you name it. So thank you to Zoom for these wonderful tools that make us look like we have it together.
Just recently, this is completely besides the point, but I had such a messy background behind me, but my computer was so old that I had to tape a piece of blue paper over my screen. So I really understand. I'm sure it's different. I don't have 4 kids. I'm just messy, but no, it's cool to have you.
Well, a plus side of the evening recording is that they've all gone to bed early, so it's nice and quiet.
Oh, Emma, so since 1996, I think it was, the Remutaka electorate has been held by Labour. What would you say to the people of the Hutt? I am one of them, actually.
Okay.
Get them to. Well, what would you get them to change their vote, or change, I guess, the historic loyalty from Labour?
Yeah, I guess I don't know if this is a different approach to what other people say when you ask questions like this, but I think the first thing I do is that I just go to people and I listen to them. And one of the things that most people say to me when I turn up on their doorstep, and we've knocked on thousands of doors in Remutaka, and countless times I've heard, no politicians ever come to my house. No one's ever knocked on my door. This has never happened to me. And I've also chosen, I guess, to spend a lot of my time in and with the community. And whether that's just going along to the cooking class at the marae, or the baking class, or going down regularly to our community cafes and spaces where our young people are, that's been really important to me on this campaign. And so I guess I don't kind of go out there with an approach of wanting to change people's vote. I go out there with an approach of wanting to listen to them and to come alongside them and learn their stories and their challenges and the things that they want to say about what they need in their lives. And that's really the conversation that then, opens up the opportunity to talk about governance and decision making and political parties. And I think from listening to people's stories, it's just clear to me that people are overwhelmingly sick of the status quo. That is the consistent message that I get on the doorstep and community organisations. you know, people are exhausted by the cost of living crisis. And to put a political slant on it, inflation's been outside of the target range for 27 months. And that really impacts families and households and small businesses. And when you go out there and hear the stories of people losing staff to Australia, or having to sell a rental and put a young family out of a home that's now had to go on a social housing wait list, or, you know, kids stopping their music lessons and going to different activities because of the pressure of the cost of living, it's really real. And, you know, that the stories that you hear aren't just about cost of living. It's also about, you know, law and order, what's happening on our streets. Just the closest dairy for us here locally, they had shoplifting in the morning and a knife attack in the afternoon. Thankfully, no one was hurt. When you get into health and education, everyone here has a story about how long it took them to access healthcare or cancer treatment, or how long they waited in ED. And we have 4 kids, so we are bouncing in and out of the health system all the time. If you guys have kids, you'll know a bit about it. But my most dramatic recent one, I'm digressing again, but I was at a speech in Wellington, and my husband rang me and he said, "It's really bad. We're going to the hospital. There's blood everywhere. Come home when you can." And I thought, oh, great. What's happening here? Turns out our 1-year-old had fallen off something and nearly bitten her tongue all the way through. And from start to end, she had to have emergency surgery, but it was about a 17-hour wait. And, you know, the staff at the hospitals were amazing. We went between after hours hospital, then changed to Wellington Hospital. But the last couple of hours of waiting were all because there wasn't a recovery nurse. The team were there ready to do the theatre, and everyone has a story like this, whether it's, you know, education, health, crime, housing, whatever it is. And so I think my approach is I listen to people's stories, and then I really want to give them that message that hope is on the way. Hope is on the way because National has a plan to tackle inflation. You know, we have a plan to restore law and order. We have a plan to focus our education system on doing the basics brilliantly, get kids back in school, focusing on achievement and progression. We've got plans for our health system that put targets back in place, resource our workforce. And when I have those conversations, I think it enables people to think about voting differently to they might have done in Remutaka before. And as a young candidate, I bring a whole bunch of energy and a fresh perspective, and hopefully a big smile most of the time. And, you know, I think that's exciting for people, and we'll see on election day for sure how it all pans out. But yeah, that's kind of my long-winded approach. I get it a bit more concise on the doorsteps, so I have to come and door knock you another time, Aimee, and give it another run. That's how I'm thinking about talking to people about how they vote this year.
Yeah, so kind of also on that, what policies of National's current manifesto would actively improve the lives specifically of women, and also reference the responses to the political party questionnaire?
Yes, I guess there's so many things in this bucket that I could kind of reference, and I'll do a little bit of a scattergun, and if there's some that you want to talk about in a little bit more detail, maybe we can pull them out. But I guess I'm really interested in the policies for women at the age and stage that I'm at now, because so many of those policies would really have impacted us over the last couple of years as a family, making decisions about having children and going in and out of employment and learning to run a household and going on maternity leave and in and out of the health system. So yeah, this is something I really care a lot about. Our health spokesperson, Dr. Shane Retty, he kind of set the tone early on in the campaign. He announced last year that National would extend breast cancer screening up to 74 years, so that this increases the number of free mammograms that women would get, and just set the tone for the focus on women's health that he wants to have. And that's something that the National Party has championed for a long time. It was, I think, Jenny Shipley originally that did the breast cancer screening in New Zealand back in about 1995, which was the year I started primary school. I actually remember coming on a school trip to Parliament when I was 11 to see Jenny Shipley. It's one of my enduring memories of my entire education. All I remember is that she wore a bright pink suit and we went to Parliament. But yeah, that focus on women's health, I think, is kind of evident in how Shane's set the tone there with breast cancer. We've also been talking about a policy called bonding in nursing and midwifery. We have a real chronic shortage of midwives, and especially here in the Hutt. We had the beautiful birth centre closed down. My youngest was one of the last babies born there. And at times in the last kind of couple of years, we've had up to 50% vacancy in our midwifery roles. And it's very stressful for mums, especially first-time mums, unable to access midwives. So our policy around nursing and midwifery says that for those coming in and studying nursing and midwifery, we will actually bond them into their role, which means every year you stay working in New Zealand after graduation, some of your student loan is paid off. So that we can both encourage people into that workforce, but also retain them in the workforce. And I know as a mum that's gone through 4 pregnancies and midwives, that would have made so much difference to us, being able to access that care more easily. Thinking about, women who are working and whether they're having children or not having children, we've done 2 different things with tax policy. So our inflation adjustment of tax brackets means that everyone who's working is going to keep a little bit more of the money that they're earning. But particularly for families with children, we've put a policy in place called Family Boost that's going to do a childcare tax rebate that, combined with our inflation adjustment, for an average income household of families with children, could mean they get up to $250 back in their pocket every fortnight. And it's called Back Pocket Boost. So it's just trying to reduce the strain on households. And I know as a mum that a lot of that the stress of it can force you to make decisions about that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of a hop, skip and a jump through, aspects of health policy that we're talking about, workforce and midwifery, childcare, tax for working ladies that want to be able to keep more of what they earn to be able to make decisions. Yeah.
Can you so ACT, not that National has committed to any coalition, but it does seem very possible that National may be in a coalition with ACT if they are successful in the election. So they've said that they will cut all demographic-based ministries. So can you confirm that the Ministry for Women wouldn't be cut under any coalition with the ACT party, or potentially the other ministries that ACT's proposed closing as well?
So like you said, as a national candidate, I am 100% focused on campaigning for a strong national government, rather than addressing really the policies of other parties. But in this instance, I do want to be clear, National would not close the Ministry for Women. We won't be doing that, no.
Yeah, that's cool to hear.
That's nice. So can you explain National's policy on the content regulatory sector and how your policies would reduce harm for women? And also on that, have you yourself been through anything where, there's been online harassment or keyboard warriors and things like that?
Yeah, I think this is such an important issue for us to talk about and to be more vocal about what we want to see online with our kids, with our friends, with our family. I can't believe the level of vitriol that hits candidates. And I know it's, not limited to being a candidate. This is just my experience, but anyone that's in a public facing role, what they face, the extraordinary level of kind of hostile comments that I got when I was selected as a candidate was almost hard to stomach. It definitely made me think about whether I'd done the right thing for our family by coming down this path. Judgment about my choices, my children, how we're working as a family, a lot of horrible abusive language coming in messages. I don't know what gives people this entitlement to talk like this online that they wouldn't do elsewhere. And, I learned quickly there's Facebook settings that can screen out comments and remove stuff, and, you get the hang of it. But yeah, it's something we need to talk about a lot, because Facebook especially, I think, has just become an increasingly unpleasant place where there's a lot of division and a lot of keyboard warriors. And it often makes people feel like they can't actually express genuine concerns or say what they think for fear of what keyboard warrior is going to come back at them and say something else. So I think you have to learn to be quite thick-skinned in this role and learn to screen things out or choose not to look at them or turn comments off things, so that you, I guess, can manage your own mental health in a role like this without getting down about it. But on the flip side, there's also a huge amount of encouragement and positivity that exists out there when you create that culture online. And my approach to running my social media has always just been to be relentlessly factual, and relentlessly respectful in engaging with everybody, whatever it is that they've said, to respond with fact and respect. And I feel like it's created, a nice environment on my page, my pages. If you guys go on, Emma Chatterton for Remutaka, it's my handle. I'm on TikTok, but very reluctantly, so maybe just don't look at it. I feel a bit old for TikTok. But with the policy lens, it's certainly something that needs, thought and review in the future. We need to think about education. We need to think about how we talk about it with young people. National introduced the Harmful Digital Communications Act to modernise things like how we respond to cyberbullying. And I think it's just a conversation that we need to keep having as a society. What do you guys find? Because you work in this online space.
Yeah, I guess, we've kind of been lucky enough where we haven't really had much hate. But when I kind of think of the podcast that I host that I was telling you about earlier, some of the topics that we talk about on that podcast can be quite, some people are quite against them because they're quite tough topics, like some of the people we interview and some of the comments that we get on some of our interviews, because we put all our interviews on YouTube and Facebook and lots of different platforms. We get some hateful comments, but just like you said, we learn to filter them out. And if we notice it's the same few people writing hateful comments every time, then we just block that person. But then 95% of the comments we get are really good, or people do like our content. So yeah, the good always outweighs the bad. Like one thing I was going to say about, the type of job you have, like, I guess if it was any like normal person that didn't have a public facing job, their go-to response would probably be just to delete their social media profile for a little while and then come back to it later. But I guess, being in the public eye, you can't just turn your Facebook page off, because that's how you communicate with everyone. So you have to think of ways to overcome these keyboard warriors while keeping your social media pages going.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And the other challenge that I didn't really mention is finding that balance between professional and personal, because in my role as a candidate, people really want to get to know you as a person. They want to understand your values and your behaviors so they can kind of get a feel for if you're the type of person they believe would represent them well. And you can't always make that judgment just when someone's standing up and giving speeches and, all beautifully prepared for things. So it's trying to give people that insight into who you are as a person, whilst still retaining some kind of privacy for your family. And that's been a really hard thing to navigate with our children, for example, because my children come to a lot of events with me. They're very interested in politics. They've got a lot to say about it. They often come along. And how do we make decisions about keeping them safe in an environment where social media is, so extensive? Do we keep them completely out of it? Do we select certain photos? Do we let them make their own choices when they get to a certain age? It's a really hard thing to navigate, and not one that there's really a lot of guidance on how to do. And it's only as you get further through that you start to think about, the impact of that. And I remember one moment for me was looking in the back end of my Facebook and seeing that a whole lot of my photos were being downloaded from somewhere else in the world. And I had photos of my family on there, and suddenly that made me feel really uncomfortable. So I thought, right, I want to take all of my photos of my family off this page. But the reality is people take photos of us all the time when we're out and about. You can't actually control that. So finding the line and bringing your family with you in a way that gets that personal and professional balance but retains some privacy, it's I'm sure a lifelong learning thing in a public role that I'm just really at the start of.
It is like it, as you say, it is really tricky, and it's like a conversation that in some ways I think we kind of avoid having because it's hard, right? Like it's hard to know where, you know, like, is it a problem? Is it a problem for only people in the public eye? And then therefore, is that a part of the job description? But then too, I don't think it is even just a problem for people in the public eye. It just probably is much more intense for people who are known and are putting themselves out there. But then at the same time, this is something that we had a discussion about earlier in the year with the National Council of Women. It was like, when women are being targeted so much more than men, and as you say, it's kind of like makes you question putting yourself out or putting yourself up for leadership roles, and you're like, oh yeah, this is pretty problematic. Like it's yeah, what is the role of government? What is the role of yourself? Because as you say, Harita, like, you can't take it down or say like bow out of the race, because that's a shame too, you know, like that's not kind of, I guess it's not a solution in a way to, it's just sort of like shutting down voices. So it is,
and
you
don't want to ever screen your social media so that there's no disagreement. Like, healthy debate is why we're all here, and tension is good. You know, tension drives better outcomes because it forces people to have meaningful conversations and listen to different perspectives, and ultimately, you know, drive to something that's better by working together. And we should learn to embrace tension and healthy debate to get us all to better outcomes. But we seem to have kind of lost that a bit in New Zealand. There's a lot of division on so many different topics that I think we've kind of lost our way with how to find that healthy tension to discuss challenging issues together without being scared of saying the wrong thing or upsetting people, or at the other end of the spectrum, people that intentionally want to do those things.
Yeah, it is, the social media, I think, has changed the way that we all interact, you know, not just with politicians, but you know, with family and friends too. So it's something that has sort of arrived, and all of a sudden it's everywhere in our lives. I
feel like I'm off the generation that's the real tipping point. I remember Facebook starting. I remember having the old Nokia phone with Snake on it. That was like the most high-tech thing you'd ever seen in your life, and you topped it up with $10 for the month, and you know, you had like 100 texts or whatever it was.
Until Boost Mobile came out. That was good.
And then getting a smartphone, getting one of the first smartphones.
Skype, that like revolutionized digital communication. I remember using Skype and like emailing my parents to book a Skype call with them when I first moved to the UK. And then to where we are now, it's like a light years of difference, isn't it?
Very important question. If people here remember Bebo, did you have a Bebo skin, and what was it?
You know, I can't even remember, but part of becoming a candidate is declaring, you know, what social media presence do you have? And I was kind of thinking back, and I was like, there are these like dead social media pages attached to my name, just littered across the internet that I don't remember. Like a Bebo. I definitely had a Bebo. I don't know what it was. I had a MySpace. Yeah, it's still out there. And then I was big on the old MSN Messenger when that first came out. I remember doing that with my parents and getting like messaged by some 25-year-old French guy, and my mum's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I don't know, just saying hello."
But I'm in love.
Certainly big changes, and hard to comprehend what the next changes will be that, you know, my kids, for example, face as they enter the world of social media in the future. Hopefully not for a long time. Fortunately, they still think the capability of computers is really just spelling and maths games. We've told them it's gaming. Our 8-year-old knows we've got hoodwinked him, but the others, they're all on board with gaming on reading.
They're like, oh yes, it's for Oregon Trail. What I guess, so are your kids, how many of them are in the schooling system at the moment?
So I've got an 8-year-old that's just about to turn 9. So he's in year 4 at the moment. He's really keen on sports. He wants to be a military aircraft engineer. So he's very interested in all the military history and books and things at the moment. Then I've got a 6-year-old daughter. She's also at school in year 2. She's a ballerina and a gymnast, very creative. Then we've got our little pocket rocket, number 4. His name's Nathaniel, but we call him Nano. So Nano had his last day at kindy today.
Oh,
And
that's so Nano.
oh, Nano, I know, I'm so proud of him. And he starts school about 9 days before the election. So yeah, it's going to be a busy week that week for the first week at school. And then our last one, Sophie, she's 2.5. So she's at home still at the moment, starting to think about what she might do for ECE. But, you know, we really treat her like the baby. She really is. I'm one of 4 kids, and I can remember I couldn't understand why my little brother got so babied by my parents. But I'm going to treat her. She's always going to be, you know, the youngest little special baby of the family.
Yeah, I totally get it when people are like, this is the last baby, you know, like there won't be another baby experience after. Yeah.
Rules the roost here. She does. What she says, that goes. Everyone kind of leaps to attention, and the other 3 are very good at looking after her. And it's really nice actually seeing them grow up in a big family. When we're trying to get out the door, my 8-year-old Arthur, he'll come over and he'll talk to Sophie like we might talk to her, and he'll say, Sophie, I'm going to give you a race to get your shoes. Let's go get your shoes. It's nice, you can kind of start to see them, you know, looking after each other. But yeah, it's a very busy, fun house here.
Oh, that's really sweet. That sounds very lovely. I do remember trying to get out the house. It was just my sister and I, but that was always a big mission. So I don't even know how you do it with 4 kids. Like that just seems like
you learn
like
about
an hour.
Yeah, pretty much. You learn about life milestones you didn't know exist previously. So we have hit one of these milestones recently, which is no one wearing nappies. It's just an amazing milestone. And after 4 kids, that's like basically 10 years of changing nappies. We had a big celebration of that. But the next one that is going to be a momentous milestone for us as a family is everyone can put on their seatbelt. It must just be a game changer, you know, getting in and out of the car. It's hectic times for us.
Oh, I bet it is. Yeah, like everyone ties their shoelaces, you know, like those are the things that we need to be celebrating.
That's another one. That's not on my list.
Oh, I guess you would have kind of quite a close understanding of the education system. Have you got kids there, but also come from a teaching background yourself? What do you see as the biggest issues facing teachers or affecting teachers right now?
Yeah, this is such a hard question because I think for teachers, they're facing challenges in so many different aspects of the classroom and the education system. And if you try and pinpoint the one biggest thing, I think it can almost make it hard to do anything. So I thought, you know, I can talk about a couple of the issues that I really see, but then National's made 2 policy announcements in education so far that we have really seen to address some of what we see as being the biggest issues in the sector. So I can talk about those a little bit as well. I mean, as a teacher myself, I think retention and burnout of teachers and the workforce is a really key issue. So many people that went into education at the same time as me have left. And so many of our older teachers will be leaving the workforce in the next 5 to 10 years. And looking at ways to attract people into teaching, to retain them, to make the workforce really attractive is going to be a really key thing for us to address in the coming years. So as a teacher, that's one of the things that I think is a big issue. How do we fill the workforce with, you know, high performing young teachers? But that issue in itself is tied up with a whole lot of other issues, because why is it that teachers are leaving the workforce? And why is it that teachers talk about burnout and being overworked and challenges in the classroom? And I guess there's lots of different things that sit in that space as well. You know, teachers are facing a lot of social challenges in the classroom. They are the front line of meeting the needs of their students, and they're doing that no matter what they are. you know, whether it's children that come to school without food or that need support to, you know, I've talked to teachers that shower children before school, not themselves obviously, but create space for children to have a shower or wash their clothes, who are working with parents around very complex social issues as well. You know, if you're sending kids home from school to houses where they might be sleeping on the floor in an overcrowded house with digital connectivity, like that's all part of being that child's teacher. You are understanding and addressing those concerns as best you can on the front line, often without the resource. Then as a teacher, you're faced with actually teaching your classroom in the here and now. And increasingly, there's so many children that are bringing additional or complex learning needs into the classroom. And for many teachers, they might have 3, 4, even more students that have additional learning needs that they're trying to support, as well as the rest of the students in their class. And then we have all of this change in policy settings that have been happening, and the way our curriculum and assessment models work. And ultimately, what we've seen over the last couple of years is just declining student attendance at school, chronic absenteeism, and now really declining student achievement. So in our recent pilot assessment, the NCEA, we saw that 2/3 of our year 10 students that were doing the assessments weren't meeting the necessary standards of numeracy and literacy to actually be considered able to participate in the labour market as the OECD defines it. And we can't have that in our system. You know, what is the hope for the future if our kids are coming out of school not able to read and write effectively? And I think the thing that's really disheartening is when you dig into the data, what you find is that schools that were lower decile, now it's the EQI or the Equity Index, but schools that were seen as lower decile schools are not achieving at that rate. It's worse. So in our decile 1 schools, when you looked at the pilot assessment for writing at NCEA, only 2% of the students were passing it, which means that we've got this embedded inequality in our system. So the challenges for our teaching workforce, they're significant, right? Because they're facing the brunt of social challenges for their students that they're trying to address, so their students are ready to learn. They're facing complex situations in their classroom, trying to meet the needs of students that bring, you know, different challenges to their learning and different opportunities to support them. And then we have these policy settings, you know, under the current curriculum, we have these broad bands, which means a student can sit anywhere in the band and you can be up to a couple of years behind before anyone says, oh, the student's actually behind. And what that means is it's a couple of years too late to get them the support they need to stay on track with their learning. So the 2 policies we've brought out so far, the first was called Teaching the Basics Brilliantly. And Teaching the Basics Brilliantly is all about getting back to what works, a focus on numeracy and literacy, an hour a day of reading, writing and maths, a curriculum that's annualized so we know what kids should be learning each year in school, professional development around the teachers and numeracy and literacy, regular assessment against the curriculum. And we've also said, we know this is change in behaviour, change in process, and we want to fund teachers' registration fees. So I know as a family that's had 2 teachers, because my husband's a teacher as well, that having those registration fees roll around all the time is has a big impact on your household budget. So that's part of that Teaching the Basics Brilliantly policy. And the second one we've announced, which is a little bit more detailed, is about the funding of structured literacy. So that's an example of what we know works from the evidence base to teach children to learn to read, and ensuring that it's funded for all of our primary schools so that all of our kids have the opportunity to use learning that evidence-based system that is demonstrating really great results in schools already. Not a clear answer. There's a lot of challenges. Can't really pick one. It depends on the teacher and the school and the environment, and you know, you could keep spider webbing that conversation forever, because you know, it's initial teacher education. What are we putting into the system, and are we giving teachers the tools that they need? It's the resources, it's our curriculum, it's the workforce. But someone once said to me, when you're working in the education space, what you need to do is look at the horizon and take small steps to direct yourself towards the horizon. And that's definitely what the education sector want. You know, teachers have seen a lot of change and they don't want drastic moves from any political party when there's a change of government. So teaching the basics brilliantly is just setting that clear intent to focus on achievement and progression of our students with the resources and curriculum around it that they need to make change for the lives of their students.
And like you said, every school has different issues depending on like the area the school is in and the type of kids that go to it. You know, the issues that a Decile 1 school has is going to be very different to an issue that a private school has, because you're dealing with a completely different set of people. And like you mentioned before, there are some teachers that, you know, have to help their kids shower and, you know, just provide the basics. It reminded me, a couple of friends of mine are teachers, and one of them is a teacher in a Decile 1 school in Wellington, and she was saying that she ends up I think she's an intermediate teacher. She ends up teaching the girls in her class about like period care because they don't get taught at home. And some of them come from such rough families that obviously once you get your period, if you get raped and things like that, obviously can lead on to a whole lot of other things. She ends up educating the girls on that because there are men in their family that, you know, have not done stuff but kind of look at them in ways that make them feel uneasy. So she ends up teaching the girls on how to stay safe from these type of people in their families. And some of these girls don't even, like, their mums don't give them pads, their mums don't even tell them what their period is. Like when they first get their period, they don't even know what's going on. So this teacher ends up doing all of this like wraparound stuff that's got nothing to even do with her intermediate curriculum. And she was just saying that, like, if you've got kids like this coming to your school, how are they supposed to learn when the stuff that goes on at home takes up all their brain space, and they're only like 11, 12, maybe 13 years old, and they don't know what's going on at home and they don't feel safe in certain ways. And then she's like, how am I meant to teach kids that are in that type of mental state? You know, and then on top of that, you got the fact that they're kind of not paid for all the stuff that they do, and it just all adds up. And it's, you know, there's so much, but how you can't really improve just the education system if the kids coming to it come from like families of poverty or families where there's gangs and violence and all of that, because fixing your education system is not going to fix all the stuff that happens outside of the school hours either.
No. And the other thing is, as teachers, you know, you don't do that at teaching training programs a lot of the time. None of the ones that I've looked at or been involved with have prepared you for some of the social challenges that you face in the teaching workforce. And so, you know, there's questions for us to ask about how we best support teachers in that instance, because really the best tool we can give children is an education. Education is the greatest driver of social mobility that there is. And so for those girls that are coming to school, we want to think that we're doing whatever we can to enable them to get the numeracy and literacy credentials that they need to be able to successfully participate in society, to get a job, to be aspirational about their future. And how do we enable our teachers to deliver that to them? What support is it that needs to be in place in the classroom? And how do we get there, really? Because there are social challenges, but we want our teachers to be focused on what they do best, which is teaching our kids, giving them that tool. That's why teachers go into education, because they believe in that social mobility that education can deliver, and inspiring their students and giving their students the confidence to go out and be successful and, you know, aspirational, live their dreams. That's what teachers are there to do. And we have to think about how we deliver those other supports to schools.
Yep. So you're currently a senior leader at the Wellington-based social investment company ImpactLab, who are combining the social value with cost information to calculate a program SROI, which is social return on investment. So can you tell us a bit more about the work involved with that?
Yes, sure. It's a kind of complex idea, but it's as complex or simple as you really want it to be. So social investment is always about thinking, how do you deliver the right service to the right person at the right time in their life to make a meaningful change? At its heart, that's what social investment is. You know, thinking about how we use social investment, we can use it to understand how to best steward our resource to make change in communities. And in a similar way, it kind of boils down to simple questions like, who do we want the policy to impact? And what do we know about those people? What do we know about their needs, about the challenges, about the barriers? What do we know about, to use the kind of technical terminology, the population segment that we're targeting with a policy? Then we have to think about how. How do we want to create that change to provide an intervention or a service or a program through a policy? And what evidence backs that up? That we can understand what knowledge, what evidence, what data is there that backs up that how. Then we think about the what. So what is the intended outcome of a program and how can we understand if it was obtained or not? And then lastly, we think about the cost of the program. And that's what helps us understand an SROI, or a social return on investment. So once you have that story of a policy, the who, the how, the what, and the cost, then you can think really, what confidence do we have that this story will create change in communities? And the tool of the SROI creates that. It's a point of comparability that allows you to think about different programs and the return that they have. And you're right, there's actually a huge amount of variance in the implementation. Like, how do you choose to implement policies? And yeah, that really is the role of the toolkit. How do you understand the difference between this approach over here, approach X, and this approach Y to make a decision? And it's kind of, I'll give you an example so it contextualizes it a bit. But when you compare different options, let's say we have two mental health policies, it's about making trade-offs between the two, comparing them, making some trade-offs. And trade-offs means deciding what you want to optimize for. What's the most important thing to me in making this policy? And therefore, how do I make decisions about it? So, just to pick a random example, let's say we have a mental health policy that we want to deliver in schools all across New Zealand for a term, that teachers deliver in classrooms, and we provide them a whole lot of resources to do it. It's kind of a preventative program about confidence and resilience, and it costs us about $50 a student. So it's a general untargeted program, but we reach everyone, and it might deliver some really good tools to students to mean that they don't develop mental health or anxiety concerns, say, further on in their journey at high school. Then on the other hand, we might have a very in-depth program that works with students for an extended amount of time with educational psychologists and social workers and tutoring and one-on-one mentoring and, in-home visits. And actually this costs $50,000 and we only reach the 1,000 students that have the greatest need. Two very different approaches. And you can see the different levers were different in each example. The who of the groups that we were targeting. On this side, it was a very general population group with a kind of low to moderate level of need. But on this side, it was a targeted population group with a very high level of need. And then the how was different in both cases as well, because here it was relying on classroom teachers to deliver resource, but here it was using experts and professionals. And then the outcomes you might measure would be different. How do you understand preventative support over here, where student confidence and resilience means mental health concerns might not develop, versus how do you understand significant change for this group over here that are having targeted support? Neither policy is right or wrong if you want to impact student mental health in New Zealand. But you can see by developing comparisons and benchmarking and thinking about what do you want to optimize for, what shift and what change do you want to see, that you might make a different decision about which thing you chose to implement. So I guess for that reason, it's really important in policy writing to get clear on those levers. Who are you targeting? What is the change you want to see? And how are you going to get there? What's the evidence base for that and the effectiveness of that evidence base in creating that change? And therefore, how confident are we that the change will be obtained in people's lives? So yeah, social change is really complex, you know, because actually underneath all of that, individual people's lives are not predictable. Yeah.
Completely. You know, I think the example you gave is kind of a nice comparison that helps to communicate what that is, because you're right, it is it sounds really complex in SROI, but when you break it down, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's an allocation of resources and we're just choosing which way to best allocate those resources. Can I ask, so is ImpactLab, so that's not a state-funded agency?
No, ImpactLab's a private business. So you see different types of customers come to ImpactLab. Sometimes it's a charity that want to be able to tell their story. They can see from the people that they work with that, you know, like people are getting into jobs, families might be getting reunited, people might be reporting improvements in their mental health and better access to healthcare, and they want to be able to tell that story. So they might go to ImpactLab, go through the SROI process, understand who they serve, how they do it, back it up with the evidence, have a list of outcomes that we can measure called good measure outcomes in the ImpactLab process, and then a quantified SROI. And the quantification of that SROI is what's a little bit different about ImpactLab to other processes, because for each outcome that ImpactLab see obtained by a provider or a program, we allocate a monetary value. So for example, what is it worth to get your driver's license? We know that there's value, right? Because if you have your driver's license, you're more likely to be able to drive to work, and you have ID, and you're less likely to get a traffic offence. And if those things, then you're more likely to contribute to the economy by paying tax, and you're less likely to draw down on the resource of police and the judicial system because you haven't incurred a traffic offence, for example. So we can kind of take these data points and these pieces of information to create a value that says getting your driver's license has this conservative value attached to it. And we can distribute that across the different areas of government that savings might be seen. And we at ImpactLab do that using the Treasury's Living Standard framework. So you could see a proportion of your social value is a saving, for example, to health by implementing driver licensing or improving mental health. So for a provider that comes to ImpactLab, you not only get those kind of substantiated outcomes, but the monetary value attached to them. And when you divide through the cost of that social value in its aggregate form, you get the SROI, which it tells a story like, for every dollar invested in this driver licensing program, there is, let's say, made up, $3.20 returned. So a 320% return on the investment that you put into the program. And it gets very interesting then, because if you were trying to make decisions, you could then look at the SROI of the driver licensing program compared to the food in schools provision, compared to period products in schools, compared to going out and doing engagement in an outdoors activity at school, and say, how do I decide to steward my resource through these things? And what are the drivers of that, for example? So it gets very interesting when you get to that comparison stage to use SROI to make decisions. And high and low SROIs don't always mean that you should stop or fund more or fund less of a program. It's just a decision-making tool. And we can't always capture everything. So this is an SROI is a conservative kind of benchmark for a program that allows them to start to tell their story.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I can definitely see the value of understanding kind of the impacts and the more longer term lens to spending or investment. Can I ask, like, as I guess I'm quite interested as someone who I live in Taita, but what do you see as the key issues uniquely affecting the Remutaka district at the moment?
I think the biggest issue that people have raised with me has been being able to get around the electorate as a local issue. So in July 2022, we had the slips come down on the Eastern Hutt Road in the weather. And you will have seen, if you're local, you know, there was also a house had to be demolished. Some residents were out of their houses for a long time. There's been significant lane closures on the Eastern Hutt Road. It's also created really significant delays for people getting in and out of Stokes Valley. Local businesses have talked to me about really significant costs on their books because of paying contractors to sit in traffic coming in and out of the valley. Last year, a whole lot of the Stokes Valley kids were late and missed NCEA exams because they were stuck in traffic. And then this year, we're still going through the remediation a year later. So I think this is a real significant local issue at the moment. It's ultimately under council, Hutt City Council, to do that remediation. So a couple of months ago now, about 8 weeks ago, I held a public meeting at the RSA in Stokes Valley. We brought the community together, we brought the council along, talked about it, kind of identified key things that the community wanted to see. Better access in and out of the valley, clear timeline, better engagement with the community, and a host of smaller things that people wanted addressed, like safety issues for kids crossing the road. I've continued to work closely with the council. I actually caught up with Mayor Barry yesterday just to talk about what progress has been made and keeping the community as up to date as I can. And work on the slips actually started to happen. The road layout's been changed at the entrance. Some of the second lanes reopened as one of the sites finished. So that's a significant issue right now, but more broadly, infrastructure around the Hutt Valley is going to be a long-term challenge. Silverstream Bridge is going to need upgrading. We've got population growth happening around the Silverstream and Stokes Valley area. With only one entrance in and out of the valley, it's quite pressured. So Nationals campaigned this year on investigating the Stokes to Haywards Connector Road that will give Stokes Valley access to both State Highway 2 and State Highway 58. As part of our transport package this year, as well as the Petone to Granada link and the Cross Valley link further down the valley. That aside, as a very tangible local issue, I think overwhelmingly the main issue that people raise with me is the cost of living and the impact that it's having on their families. So I feel like that driver of building a strong economy, lifting incomes, reducing tax by shifting those tax brackets by inflation so that we can enable New Zealanders to get ahead is a really key issue for a lot of people living here. But you are a local constituent, so I'm going to fire it right back at you. What do you think are the key issues for people in Remutaka right now?
Well, I'd say the main issue is that I want more daffodils on the roundabout.
Big
More
problems.
daffodils on the roundabout.
I'm sure that can be done. Let me get my book.
No, there's honestly so many daffodils on the roundabout. It's really nice. What do I think is the main? I would say, yeah, infrastructure as well. Like, and I guess cost of living, but at the same time, it does seem that, and maybe this is, you know, not for this conversation, but the inflation or the inflation that we're experiencing now, that the whole world is experiencing, perhaps this is a necessary response to that we got through the pandemic alive. And I don't know, I guess I don't feel that narrative is really acknowledged. That do you know what I mean?
What you're saying. I hear what you're saying. We went through a pandemic, right? But every government is going to face challenges. And whether it's the next pandemic or the next earthquake or the next financial crisis, whatever it is, it's our response to the crisis that's really important. And unfortunately, the way that this government has responded to this crisis has put our economy into flatline. We are 158th out of 159 countries for economic growth projections. We are $73.4 billion in debt. The interest payments on that debt are about to eclipse our police budget. And for all of that spending, we don't have anything to show for it. Our attendance at school is poor. Our student achievement is poor. We've got rising crime. We've got massive ballooning wait lists for our health system. We don't have a whole lot of new infrastructure or hospitals or a strengthened health workforce. Most people that I talk to on their doorsteps are saying, if you guys don't get in, we're going to move to Australia. I'm sick of this. Like the situation that we're in has happened because of government spending. And when we're talking about wasteful spending, we have to be really clear about what that means. It's money that doesn't deliver value for communities. Like spending $2.4 million to do one pedestrian crossing down at Cobham Drive. I don't think that's money that's delivered value for communities, or hundreds of millions of dollars on projects that get cancelled, or hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars ballooning out the budget on consultancy fees that then don't deliver value because there's nothing implemented. You know, light rail in Auckland was meant to be finished by next year. There's not one in the ground. And I think the public are sick of hearing announcements that don't happen. 100,000 houses never got built. Like, we've got to get back to thinking about what works. You know, as a family, we don't go living way beyond our means and spending money that we don't have. And we need to start taking more of that approach to some of the spending that's happening in our government departments. Like, I'm sure you guys saw in the media about the $40,000 party for someone that left a government ministry, one public servant. Like, it's just not responsible use of taxpayer investment. And that government spending is what has driven our non-tradable inflation, which is inflation that's driven from our domestic economy rather than external factors, to be so high for so long. So whilst acknowledging there has been a global pandemic and we have lived through a time that's been extraordinarily challenging, it's our response to that that's important. And the next one could be around the corner, and we can't afford to do that again. We have to grow a strong and resilient economy to give any hope for our kids to be able to make choices in the future about investment for change as well.
And on that note of Labor, like spending money that they don't have, there's what National has announced that they would cut all or drastically reduce the number of contractors and consultants within government organisations to bring the cost down. So obviously Labor's received a lot of criticism for the amount of spending in those areas and for not keeping a cap on the number of contractors and consultants within the government organisations. But on the other side of that, sometimes it's necessary to bring in contractors and consultants when you're looking at, you know, a piece of work that you need experts in for a short amount of time that you don't want permanent staff doing. So what are your thoughts on this subject, and how could National do it more effectively while reducing the numbers of contractors and consultants, but not impacting the work that all the government organisations actually put out there?
Yeah, it's a balance, right? I think I'm relentlessly focused on what delivers value for communities. And so in my view, the kind of additional $700 million that this government spent on consultants, combined with the 14,000 extra bureaucrats that they've got working in Wellington, I can't see the results of that for communities, which makes me question whether it was necessary, and especially whether all of it was necessary. And, you know, National's been clear that there are going to be some changes under a national government in respect to the amount of money that is being spent on consultants like that. I think a big problem for this government has been this kind of relentless pursuit of big, expensive, and ultimately relatively unsuccessful reform programs, amalgamating things together into big bureaucracies, things like Three Waters and health reforms and Te Pukenga. And ultimately, for the person who's receiving the service, either nothing changed or it got worse. So we need to think about that. And part of that is using tools like SROI, or the social return on investment, something that has a feedback loop between the decision maker and the community that's telling us if those things are delivering value. But fully acknowledging your point, there is a role for contractors, right, to bring in specialist expertise knowledge to help deliver those positive results for communities. But National will be asking agencies to find, an average of around 6.5% in efficiencies to make sure that we are focused on delivering things that work and cutting things that are wasteful from those government spending line by line items.
So if you are elected, Emma, what changes are you hoping to start working on first?
I imagine, and this is probably a good question for me to go and ask the MPs, but I imagine as a first-time MP, there's a huge amount of listening and learning that needs to take place before I kind of go crashing through with the changes that I want to see. I am very committed to building meaningful long-term relationships with my community, and I want to be out there in and alongside my community, listening to them all the time, getting to know the local issues, and being prepared to really champion local voice across our electorate, whatever that looks like. Sounds like it will be in the procurement of daffodil seeds, firstly, for the tighter area, which I do take very seriously. But things like, these local infrastructure issues, I want to really champion local voice and be there, be alongside people. In Parliament, I guess one of the things that I'm really interested in is how we use this concept of social investment to start underpinning how we think about change, how we write policy, how government departments are working, how we use an evidence base and data to drive effective decision making. We have an amazing tool in New Zealand in the IDI, which is the integrated data infrastructure, that records huge amounts of social data that can be used to drive better positive outcomes if we know what it is and how we use it. Same with all of our social survey data information. So I think I want to be very much focused on listening and learning to start, thinking about how we optimize services and systems to deliver results for communities. I have a real passion for education. So listening to the teaching workforce and helping provide some of the solutions to those problems that we talked about that exist in that very complex system. I'd love to start being a part of that change. And I think the change that National wants to see as a party is very much represented in the way that we set targets. It sets the intent of where we want to go. So in education, that's getting 80% of our kids back at curriculum by 2030. And getting New Zealand back into one of the top 10 performing countries in the OECD. And in health, it's setting health targets like getting 95% of people seen within 6 hours of arriving at ED. And you'll see those targets across our policies because they are our commitments and a way for the public to hold politicians and government departments and their investment as taxpayers, accountable for delivering change. So thinking about the how is really important, but that's kind of the intent, I guess, of the change that I'd like to see over time.
You've got a lot of energy and gusto.
Yeah, I think you need it. People, I think, are really ready for a version of politics that is really positive, and I've very intentionally taken that with me on the campaign. Positive, grounded in community engagement approach to being out there in the community. That's why I love the daffodils idea. I think it's on brand.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. Just before we finish up, what have been some of your funniest and most memorable moments while campaigning over the last few months?
Gosh, there are so many. I remember when I was first selected, everyone said to me, just write a journal or even record yourself a voice note, because the craziest things happen over campaigns and you'll never remember them all. And they were so right. And even now, I think I need to go back and start writing all of those stories down. But to pick a few, I remember once, I'm going to throw Erica under the bus here, literally. I was up in Auckland with Erica doing some education meetings. Erica Stanford, our education spokesperson, and we came out of a car park and wrongly went into a bus lane, and it was just like gridlocked traffic. and we were sitting there in her branded car with her face all over the side, like trapped in this bus lane, as everyone really judgmentally looked at us. And then I kind of comically hid, but once I comically hid, I thought, oh, now it's going to look really weird if I pop back up, because it's going to look like I was hiding and it was actually just a joke. So then I ended up kind of like trapped in this comically hid position in the branded car in the bus lane. So, you know, I remember that quite vividly. I also remember recently we were out in an event right out the back of one of the rural parts of Remutaka doing a dinner with some local community members. And we went out and a member of my team went to start the car and it was just totally dead. And the community being so hospitable, we didn't want to go wake them up for like this dead car. So in the end, we ended up driving all around Upper Hutt at like 11:45 at night, trying to find a set of jumper leads, which we eventually got through the kind of bin that the petrol guys have for after hours. And they like shoved it through where you normally get ice creams and pay. So we dragged these jumper leads out, went all the way back and started trying to get this car started at like 12:30 in the morning. It was just bizarre. There was no power, like, so we were like shining our phones around. I've never jump started a car, but it's now a skill that I have, along with building hoardings that I didn't know was an essential campaigning skill. But many stories from the campaign.
I really think that bus lane story is very good.
Yes. Sorry to Erica. Sorry for bringing her embarrassing story into my memory of the campaign. I'm sure it's all good.
But I can just imagine the people being like, "Oh my God, the audacity!"
Bus lane. I know. My greatest fear is really driving my branded car around with my face in the electorate. You know, where do you park it? Is it parked correctly? What's the time? I mean, we should have these behaviours all the time, but I dread the thought of photos of my car poorly parked or being towed away, being shared online.
The face on the car, I think, is a very funny. I mean, like, face on the sign must be a bit strange too, but face on the car is maybe actually everyone should have that, and we'll all be better parkers and better drivers.
Yeah,
you can get away with like, yeah, when you go and get your rego done, you get your face printed on your car as well.
It's like the ultimate ID tag. I remember when when I first got my face on the car, I'd forget, because it was just like our car, right? So I'd get in and be driving around, and people kind of see the car coming and they look a bit more intently like this, and then they look straight at the driver, like to see if it's you that's driving the car with your face on it. And I'd be just driving along, living my good life with all of these people like this while I was driving. And then I'd remember, oh, it's because I'm in the branded car. The billboards were definitely weird for my kids. Like, they were like,
see their mum everywhere.
Yeah. And even more so when I started getting like horns drawn on my head when they first went up. They thought that was pretty funny. But yeah, most of that behavior seems to have stopped now, which is nice.
Hey, well, I guess there's only a couple more weeks, so I hope no more horns. I'm not a fan of the graffiti, but although it is sometimes, I do wonder, I'm like, what is the inspiration behind this one? I don't even understand it. So
yeah, on the whole, it's actually been very, very good. There's been, when the signs first got put up, there was the odd one that had kind of the eyes cut out, but weirdly, I think the eyes kind of draws people's attention as well, because the light shines through. It's kind of Star Wars-esque from behind. But yeah, there was a bit of graffiti and damage, but on the whole, it's actually been really good. So thanks to the locals.
Hey, well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. I imagine that, in addition to Nano finishing kindy and, a couple of weeks out from the election, starting school, the birthdays, you've got a very busy schedule. So thanks very much for joining us tonight, Emma.
No, my pleasure. Thank you, guys. It's nice to reflect on the last kind of 7 or 8 months, really.